you've got towers, you've got receptors and others. So it's key that you know the pieces and the parts. But check out this book. It's a great book. I do a lot of work with colleagues in Africa. There was some cable that was being laid, terrestrial fiber, and this large animal was stepping on the fiber. What happens when an elephant steps on fiber? Breaks the fiber. So this has led to innovation and technology, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and other countries, so that they take their natural environment into consideration, but also the physical. Also in parts of Africa now, they're putting copper on top of terrestrial fiber in order for people not to steal the fiber. They're also putting witch doctor marks in Kenya, true story. Colleagues at something called Liquid Telecom, they're laying about 100 kilometers of fiber a day in sub-Saharan. They've got to put certain marks to keep people from taking that infrastructure. We have the same problem in the US, copper's getting stolen everywhere, so it's not just in certain other developing parts of the world. So that's led to innovation. Sharks, I made a happy shark because we're on an island, and I'm from an ocean area. These guys used to bite the submarine cables, you know, because they could feel the electrical pulses. That was many, many years ago. And if anyone's here from Columbus, my apologies. I know your technology is much better than that today. But this also led to innovation on the subsea cables. And you have one coming in here, yes? Yeah, okay. So, also, for you regulators and policymakers, you could really mess up the internet. I used to be both, so I can say this. If you try and make a decision without talking to industry, without talking to civil society, without working with many of the experts, you know, here today, many of you, quite frankly, you know your environment, a decision can be made that doesn't help the local environment, right? And or the region. So we often take advantage of good practices from other countries in this region, but also from a regulatory and policy perspective, there's some really innovative work being done. And this is where it's important that people talk to each other. One other really important best practice that we're finding globally is that many government agencies often don't talk to each other. So if you have a public works project, say in a place where you're putting a railroad or even an electrical grid, a new one, or a road, and you don't put in fiber now, or whatever other technology is relevant to the local terrain, you could be losing out. We have been looking very closely at a double landlocked country. We have a report out on Kyrgyzstan where, for them, this is huge. If you're putting in a railroad, a new mobile network, what kind of backhaul fiber are you putting in? What other kind of technology is being implemented? Wi-Fi, WiMAX, whatever works in your country. But also, this is us. You know, how can we help inform you and give you good data? What can we do? Workshops like this. Great partnerships with Aaron, with ICANN, and with other experts. So, connecting to the next billion, and part of this whole picture on the internet, these are some statistics from Cisco. I'm not going to read through all of them, but if you look at by 2020, 5.5 billion global mobile users. And for those of you that were at the World Congress last week, you know that mobile technology, and particularly I think for your island nation, critical, right? Digicel knows this, and others in building out that infrastructure. 2020, there'll be 11.6 billion mobile-ready devices. Mark talked about this this morning. Mobile connection speed will increase, IP traffic up, billions of global internet users. What this all boils down to is what is it that you're doing internally or regionally to increase the use of infrastructure? Is it wiring the schools? Is it making it more accessible, the Wi-Fi in the hotels and cafes and other things like that, or just generally available publicly? And that's where the government also can be very helpful with the public works projects in collaboration with industry and the public-private partnerships. There's more data here from Cisco at this site. This cloud picture, and again, I don't like the term cloud, but in any event, it's kind of a marketing term in some ways if you look at it, right? They draw this cloud around the things inside, perhaps the data center, quite frankly, and this is the outside part. You don't think when you're using, say, Twitter on your handheld device, Twitter's services are not in the country here, right? You're pinging their data center when you use Twitter. So who here uses Yahoo, Gmail, Hotmail? All of us, right? So where do they keep their data? On the island? Nope. So it's in a massive data center somewhere. And I had a question for Digicel. Do you keep all your data here, or do you have it backhauled somewhere and have a redundant facility where your info is? And I'm not asking where, because that's a security-related question. And I used to work for AT&T, so I get it, right? But you must have a place where you keep a lot of your data. Yeah, okay, customer data. We're not talking about, they're not looking inside every text message you send, usually, right? Or Raquel today, who's checking on WhatsApp, where they've let the guy out of jail in Brazil. WhatsApp pushes out that data. They don't look at it, right? They're just pushing. It's not in their business model to go, gosh, what did they say? You know, because they're not interested in that. It's also impossible from a business perspective. But in any event, so cloud computing, the metaphor is the cloud, right? The services are in it, but truly it's this physical infrastructure. Computers, you know, I thought I'd put these definitions in. I've kind of morphed some from the web. But, you know, it starts with computers, computing, the network, the cloud, you've seen, and data centers. And I want to get to data centers in a minute because this is the good conversation that we've had here. But as you all know, for any service that you run and network that you provide, power is huge, right? It's a massive issue. Also security and what pieces are inside that data center. So again, here's another great picture. I like this one because it kind of brings it all into perspective. So why do people use the cloud? Cost, right? So if I'm Instagram, or let's use Yahoo for an example, or if I'm going to buy a service from Amazon and rent out some of their servers, it's easier for me from a cost perspective as a new startup company to use their servers, right? I can rent as much space as I want, and I can scale it up and down. My business is doing well. I have a huge project for a consulting company, or I'm a consultant. Poof, I can get more service, pay for. Or I can scale it back if I don't need it, pay as I go. Someone else is buying that equipment. They can amortize it. I don't have to worry about that. And worry about the infrastructure, quite frankly. I can downscale, like I said, or reduce resources. And apps can be up and running faster by using this sort of outsourced service. But what are those issues? And Raquel mentioned some of this yesterday. Who owns the data? Is it you? Can you get that data, like now? Who's protecting the privacy of that data? Now, quite frankly, again, well, we all know about Snowden. This has been a huge issue for us as the Internet Society, and it's something we put a big notice out, just as a disclaimer about encryption and the importance of open source encryption. So we as an organization put out a message saying we didn't really love what was going on there. And I'm not talking about the NSA sniffing the data, but who's, from your privacy perspective of your customers, and if you're outsourcing and storing your data in a data center in the cloud, what is the privacy policy, right? Do most people know? Answer's probably no. Localization of data and access to technology. We have a huge report on content and the importance of data localization and or hosting in country. So for some countries who are trying to preserve national heritage, you want to have information about your country somewhere, but are you keeping it just in country? Are you hosting it outside? Are you trying to encourage a hosting environment? We usually say yes. Again, back end of in a data center, these wires are very important. So from a local perspective, with island nations, you have submarine cable access. You know, satellite's super expensive, right? Do you have redundancy? And what I mean not just subsea cable redundancy, but redundancy of data being hosted locally so that if something happens to the cable, can you get fast access to that data? Factors needed. Is a shared data center something you'd want to do from a public-private partnership perspective? Does the government need a data center? Think of it that way too. Are your schools wired? Are citizens able to afford and have access to connectivity? The connected generation, youth training, and roadmap for public-private partnerships. This all ties in together with what you're trying to do as a country, a community, and or a region. So a question, and I think this to start with for Lester, are you approached by people, and we'll need a microphone, are you approached by people about data center development? And what would your answer be to, do we need one here? Do you have one? I think you don't have one, yeah?
We have one
Who has a microphone? No, sorry, we're webcasting, which is why I went through all this. And that's why I'm also, there are people listening in. Yesterday we had about 230 people from the region listening and watching. So just know that that's one of the services we do try and provide when we do meetings and events, is that we're webcasting this out. And we thank the guys in the room who are taking the pictures, rolling, and 2 colleagues back home, Jolly McPhee and Dan York. But
Good morning, Lester Foreman, Director of IT, Fortis TCI. I don't necessarily get approached regarding data centers. What I do get approached on very often is applications and services that are predominantly cloud-based. And what I always ask the question of, and very few of them have actually thought about it, that in the Turks and Caicos we have a single connection to the internet superhighway, and unless we're looking at a hybrid hosted cloud solution, for us, high availability of data is paramount.
so that might mean a redundant cable, which I know the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, separate area obviously, but are looking at building their own government funded, sponsored cable. Carlton knows more. The reason largely is due to try and create more connectivity, redundancy, but also provide probably some cheaper access to services that can be brought into the country. I would assume that they would also be looking at liberated backhaul from the submarine cable landing station, first mile, middle mile, last mile connectivity issues. But again, for you, it's more or less if you had a redundant link that would provide even more potential for capacity. Are there any banks here? So that's often those organization banks obviously have very important networks. And banking is what your second big industry in this area, in this island, right? So banks run their own networks. We often see them interconnecting, and I'll talk about this a bit later, with internet exchange points. In some countries we work in, the IXP, the place where there's a collaborative peering at a neutral location for a very low price, usually, and a collaborative environment. It's better to peer at the IX in some countries. It's more consistent. Now here, there's a different environment. You have sophisticated operators, yeah? But what is it that you're looking for to try and develop in-house? And then what is your roadmap, right? Do you want to create that local hosting environment and strengthen it? Do you want the redundant cable so that you have more access to other cloud services? It's not just cloud, right? It's more access to applications, as you're saying. And will that grow the next generation of, because your children, those of you who have kids, how many of them have iPads or just a smartphone? Both. Okay, look at you. All right. That's amazing, right? And who has the youngest, let's see, who's the youngest child who has an iPad? 2, 3, 4, oh my gosh, 2 years old. All right, wow. I have a dog, I don't have kids. But if your children at the age of 2 years old, so for the companies here, who are your next customers? I mean, these are your consumers in the future are the connected generation. So when we talk about, we'll do this afternoon too, the connecting the next billion, I'm often hearing people say it's not the next, because there's the next billion, or let's be honest, next millions, right, are already going to be connected because they're growing up that way. But what are they going to need? Voice, video, data, some of the statistics from Cisco are massive with respect to the data use that will go, video use in the future. So you've got to store those videos somewhere because they're not stored on your smartphone, right? And they're not stored on your laptop, or I hope not, right? It's a lot of capacity. But if you're reaching back, and I did this morning, I was using, it's Microsoft Azure, right? Where they're putting most of their services in the cloud. I forget every day. I'm accessing email, but that email is not, quote, it's on my computer, I see it, right? But it's somewhere else, stored. So that's something to think about when you're developing your own services, using these services. What is it that you're hoping to do 5 to 10 years from now? And as companies, what are you doing for redundancy purposes? Have hurricanes ever wiped out the island here has been pretty lucky, yeah? And you don't have a volcano like Pearl Montserrat, right? So, no, seriously, if you're thinking of emergency services as well and your backup, right? A company's going to want to back up their data somewhere else. Government will want to back up their data, probably here and somewhere else. And so how does that work from a collective government perspective? And the nice thing about your community is it's probably, you probably know each other, right? It's small enough so you can start to have different conversations. And so I'll leave you with one thought. When we're in certain countries and we're starting out this conversation about technology and trying to be a trusted, neutral expert, we look at something called network operator group development. And those are people that are interested in technology, that run networks. You could be the ISP coordinator, manager for your company. You could be the IT tech lead. It doesn't matter. If you're interested in technology, you can come together and share information. What we often see is that this is online. Like we were talking about earlier, the ARIN list. That's exchange of information among V6, V4 experts, routing, as well as Mark was saying. Do you want to create a network operator group here? It doesn't have to be fancy. A lot of people just go out and have drinks, coffee, tea, punch, whatever you have, you know. When we work in the Middle East, we're headed there at the end of this month for a big Middle East network operator group meeting where there's also a peering forum, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But how you bring that technical community together, because you also want to think about the next generation. Who are you bringing along, and how does that work? Both from a government, company, and other perspective. Any other points you want to raise about the local environment? Okay, everyone's hungry. So we're going to go to lunch, yeah?
I'm the moderator, Jane. Okay. Other questions for Jane? Okay, just a comment. I mean, the discussion is not whether or not to use, let's say, cloud-based services because we are using them.
Yeah.
But I think we should elaborate a bit on what to put in the cloud. So can you, based on security challenges and things like that, I mean, it's not only about, okay, of course we're using cloud, but can you elaborate a bit on what to use in the cloud, especially to give some recommendations to governments or policymakers?
Sure. I mean, I guess this goes to the how are you backing up your data issue, right? And or how do you want to offshore your data for redundancy purposes? Do you want to put all of your data in the cloud? That's a question you have to ask yourself from an infrastructure perspective as a company and as a government, right? And how do you have access? What are the privacy policies? How do you access that information? Where's the storage? So I think that's a roadmap issue where if you want to take a look at, you've got to look at your own environment, right, and assess it. I don't want to tell people they should or shouldn't, right? But right now we're using a lot of cloud-based services. What is the government or local companies, what do they want to do to protect the information? And is it protected if it's offshore? It usually is, right? But the question is, what about a hack, right, Shernan? So from a security perspective.
Are there any other question for Jane? No? Okay. So we are going for lunch now. Let's take 1 hour and we will resume at 1:30. Thank you very much.